Truly great games always leave an impression. Anyone with a true understanding or passion for the activity will know what I mean by that. Individual preference is, of course, highly subjective, but when a game is truly well crafted, gripping, or inspiring, it leaves a lasting impression which can be very hard to replicate. Recently in gaming news, there has been a notable trend discussing developer crunch time and focusing on the working conditions that game developers face while producing the products that we all know and love. The details that have emerged are somewhat troubling, and one of the pioneering voices behind this trend is Jason Schreier. Now, to be clear, I don't agree with everything that Jason Schreier writes, but he is a legitimate example of unique reporting. In a landscape dominated by bad faith journalists with absolutely no talent, legitimacy, integrity, or intelligence, even when one disagrees with certain aspects of a given reporter's style, if they produce material that is engaging to read, avoids disingenuous or malicious pretenses, and conveys valuable information, it should be respected and acknowledged. Jason Schreier is, by my definition, one such journalist, even if I do not always agree with his material, and he has taken a notable interest in developer safety and working conditions. Born of this interest are a number of different articles, built off of the information given by inside sources which highlight the working conditions within major development studios and publishers. To summarize the general atmosphere here, within game development, especially regarding high-profile releases and upcoming popular titles, there is a phenomenon called crunch time. Now, this is not something that is unique to gaming, not at all. It's a common circumstance in product launches all around the globe, or conceptual development, especially when deadlines are approaching, but the working conditions within the gaming industry appear to be somewhat more intense. The most recent revelations come from within Activision Blizzard and Treyarch as they advance towards the release of their new Call of Duty game, Modern Warfare. Modern Warfare will be the latest in a long line of continuous, annualized releases within the Call of Duty franchise dating back as far as 2005. The article focuses mainly on the QA or quality assurance workers who are hired on as contractors through an independent third party and appear to be laboring under extreme circumstances during the lead up to this new game. I won't dive into major specifics here, but there is an atmosphere of distrust. QA contractors are often excluded from company events. They are told not to socialize with development staff. They are subjected to malicious holiday payment parameters, which make it all but impossible to get paid time off for major holidays. They are expected to work overtime in excess during the lead up to a game release, and they even have to operate in extreme conditions when, for instance, the air conditioning will automatically shut off at the end of a standard workday while they continue to test the game surrounded by heat-producing electronics throughout the entire night. Now, on a basic human level, this is wrong, and it's an issue that is pretty easy to rally behind. For me, there is an immutable expectation that workers should, at the very least, be made adequately comfortable in order to function at peak efficiency. Now, to be clear, the concept of overtime is not something that is inherently bad, despite what the current media frenzy is pretending. I myself have worked 12, 16, even 18-hour days for weeks on end in the past, but during that crunch time, which was self-inflicted, I might add, I was able to operate in relative comfort. For the QA contractors at Treyarch, the working conditions appear to be in breach of what can be considered reasonable or comfortable, and because of this, I am of the mindset that internal reform is certainly necessary. Not only that, but subjectively, I view quality assurance to be one of the most important segments of game design. I don't care how cool the concept is, if it's buggy and it doesn't work, it's unplayable garbage. So having a functional, well-integrated QA team is not a detriment to the product, it is of immeasurable benefit. This is not the only example of poor working conditions. There is a lengthy list that is still expanding. Epic Games, CD Projekt Red, BioWare, the names are notable and numerous, and again, on the most basic of levels, it is obvious that fair treatment and worker health must be a priority, but to truly analyze the phenomenon of development crunch time and its effect on video games, it requires a bit more analysis than a reactionary and emotional response. There is a commonly referenced correlation between crunch time, overworked employees, and product quality. There is data to support that productivity rises as a direct function of time invested at a fixed rate, up to a certain threshold that is, at which point productivity starts to decline relative to how much time is being spent on the same task. Basically, more time means more progress unless you spend too much time working and become tired or overworked, at which point your productivity drops compared to what it normally is. This leads to a lot of emotional responses from people who advocate for shorter working hours with the connection that because of that reduction, there is higher productivity. This is a stone cold lie. Think of it this way. If you have two identical workers in a vacuum side by side, and they each work for 8 hours on the same task, their output would be equal. But now take one of these workers and have them work 16 hours on the same task while the other still only works 8. The scientifically proven result would be that the average productivity per hour of the worker who labored for 16 hours would be substantially lower than the one who only worked for 8. But the difference is not so extreme that it would come even close to offsetting the overall amount of work that was done. The worker who labored for 16 hours achieved a total sum that is monumentally beyond the worker who only spent 8 hours. This is the issue. Forced labor, which exceeds a healthy threshold, is unacceptable, but incentivized labor in the lead up to a deadline may in fact be the only way that a product launches in working condition, if it even launches at all. There are two major examples within the games industry that I want to bring up. First, in light of the recent focus on CD Projekt Red and its upcoming title Cyberpunk 2077, which has come under scrutiny regarding troubled development and working conditions, is The Witcher 3. The Witcher 3 is a critically acclaimed masterpiece. It might not be a game that appeals to everyone, but by and large it is heralded as one of the best open-world fantasy games in history, with extremely pro-consumer DLC practices and a high standard of product quality. It's not without its bugs and its quirks, obviously, but generally speaking, the game is a cut above the rest, and the gaming industry at large recognizes that fact. Here is where we start to see the brutal trade-off of quality versus crunch time. The Witcher 3 came under fire in 2014 when accusations were leveled against the studio for creating a crunch time atmosphere that was harmful to developers. Another important thing to note is that the game was also delayed deliberately to increase the amount of time available and make sure the product was polished to a level that gamers expect and deserve. But even with that delay, the accusations of unfair working conditions and crunch time were unmitigated. CD Projekt Red acknowledged these concerns, admitted fault, and has vowed to improve their conditions, but a singular fact remains. The Witcher 3, as we know it, the blockbuster open-world fantasy RPG that many salute to this very day as their favorite game of all time, would not have existed without crunch time development. The second example I want to bring up is Dragon Age Inquisition. Inquisition is far from the monolith of Witcher 3, but it was still valued by many as a quality open-world fantasy game. I myself greatly enjoyed it, and it was not in fact my favorite of the series. That title is awarded to Dragon Age Origins, but I still spent many hours exploring the world, finding every single dragon, and crafting the best armor to outfit every party member I could find. However, Dragon Age Inquisition is another example of development crunch time. It wasn't until the aftermath of Anthem, BioWare's latest game, that I really learned about the true effect and history of Inquisition. It turns out that Inquisition had been almost entirely produced during crunch time development, so much so in fact that BioWare staff were scared when it performed so well. Since the game had been made in a frantic last-minute effort, which then became known as BioWare Magic, what would it mean for future titles? Well, it turns out they were right to be nervous because Anthem, while attempting to follow through on Inquisition's trailblazing steps after 6+ years of spinning its wheels, crashed and burned worse than almost any other game I have ever seen in my entire life. It became clear that crunch time doesn't always work, that BioWare Magic is not an immutable reality, and that proper time utilization is extremely important rather than wasting over half a decade doing fuck all. But still, a quality title that many hold dear, Dragon Age Inquisition, lives on as an example of crunch time, leading to a release that was well received and widely praised. As the focus on developer crunch time continues to grow, it's important to understand the very real complexity that surrounds the issue. It may seem obvious on a surface level that crunch time shouldn't exist and worker health should be a top priority. I am in full support of the concept that worker conditions need to be healthy, happy, and fair, but long hours, overtime, and crunch as a concept is something far more integrated into the industry as we know it than many gamers realize. Some of the best work I have ever produced, as well as some of the videos I am most proud of, came after sleepless nights with dark circles under my eyes and not enough food in my stomach because I had gotten distracted and only eaten half a bagel or something like that for dinner while researching and writing. Likewise, some of the best games I have ever played, I have now learned were born of long overtime hours and difficulty crammed into pre-release weeks and months. There is often a human cost associated with meaningful accomplishments and innovation. In the games industry, the current balance of hard work and deadline-oriented results is certainly out of alignment, but when laying down rigid timetables with the expectation that something be finished on or before a specific date, it is inevitable that there will sometimes be crunch time necessary to not only complete the project on time, but to do so with at least a bare minimum level of quality. If strict reform were to be imposed on the industry that dictated companies were not allowed to create incentivized overtime, or to use the now popular keyword, create crunch time, it could easily lead to an increase in both length and frequency of game delays. It could result in a larger number of outright cancellations, or a departure from the ability of certain franchises, like Call of Duty, for example, to operate on an annualized release schedule. And to be clear, these are not necessarily horrible things on principle, were they to happen more frequently at least, but there is a direct departure from getting more games faster when eliminating the idea of crunch time development. In my opinion, incentivized overtime is not a bad thing at all. This idea that working long hours is somehow immoral or unethical is whiny bullshit. Getting paid extra for increased labor with acceptable working conditions under a voluntary framework is sometimes not only acceptable, but necessary to accomplish goals. But when those working conditions degrade, or the overtime becomes expected under penalty of severance, that is when there is a real issue. With revelations of working conditions so stressful that developers are having full mental breaks, it's obvious that reform and adjustment is needed, but overcompensating for a detrimental issue or event is not a whole lot better. Framework to ensure a healthy work environment is something I can certainly get behind, but how you go about affecting change is an often ignored keystone that is critical to consider. The quest to paint the concept of crunch time as an inherently bad thing is asinine, but the pursuit of a better environment for creative professionals is noble. As we navigate the space, it's important to understand that emotional reactions to stories or buzzwords are a detrimental thing because the complexity of the issue often exceeds what is being conveyed in that single article, blog post, or video. In an industry so heavily focused now on headlines and sound bites, the deeper relationship between good, bad, and reality is becoming blurred. If we truly strive to have the best and most profound impact on all parties involved, both developers and gamers as well, it requires looking past the simple analysis of long hours and crunch time must be eliminated, which is a profoundly one-dimensional and ignorant position. That's it for today though. There is a brutal trade-off between crunch time and results, but it's not a zero-sum game. Not unless we pretend it is and turn it into one through generalization and broad strokes emotional reaction. If you want to support the channel, check out the links down below. We have merch, various memberships, and some other stuff as well, but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.